Chapter 1. The Rot Begins. The morning sun barely pierced the thick veil of ash-gray clouds that hung over the village of Darien, a small settlement clinging to the edge of the once mighty empire of Viralia. The air was heavy with the sickly scent of rot and decay, a constant reminder of the creeping blight that had swallowed whole the fertile fields beyond. Elara moved through the wilting crops with practiced care, her lean frame bending low as she inspected the blackened leaves of the withering plants. Her sharp green eyes caught the faintest glimmer of something unnatural, faint veins of pale, pulsing light snaking through the Blight's corruption like veins of poison coursing through the land. She knelt closer, the rough earth cold beneath her worn hands, and traced the patterns with trembling fingers. It was unlike any sickness she had ever seen. The rot seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm, as if alive, as if it breathed beneath the surface of the soil. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to focus. The villagers depended on her knowledge, her skill, and her hope. Behind her, the low murmur of the village waking stirred. The old, vibrant houses were now stained with grime and neglect, their wooden frames warped and cracked by years of abandonment and blight. Children coughed in the distance, their pale faces pinched with fever, while elders whispered prayers to gods long forgotten. The blight had come swiftly, like a shadow swallowing the light, and no one was spared. Elara rose and brushed the dirt from her hands, her mind racing with questions. The patterns she had seen, were they a sign? A message? She could not yet say, but the idea gripped her heart with fierce urgency. She had to know more. Inside her modest hut, the air was thick with herbs and the faint smoke of burning sage. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on cracked walls adorned with dried plants and vials of tinctures. Elara crouched beside a small cot where a child lay sweating, her breath shallow and ragged. The child's skin was pale and mottled, with dark splotches spreading across her arms like ink stains. Elara's hands glowed faintly with a soft emerald light as she channeled her healing magic, murmuring ancient words taught by her mother long ago. The child's fevered eyes fluttered weakly open, searching for comfort. Elara smiled gently, her voice steady despite the knot of worry tightening in her chest. "Rest now. You are safe here. I will not let the blight take you." Outside, the village square was stirring to life. Old Joran, the village elder and storyteller, stood before a small gathering, his voice gravelly yet filled with a quiet strength. His silver hair caught the weak sunlight as he recounted the empire's faded glory, weaving tales of a time when Virelia's banners flew proud and its magic was a beacon of hope. "Long ago," he intoned, "this land was alive with power and promise, but with pride came hubris, and the forbidden magic was sought to bind life itself. It is that same magic that birthed the blight, a curse upon our world." The crowd listened in solemn silence, the distant coughing and restless movements a stark contrast to the stories of ancient splendor. Among them, Elara's apprentice Mira stood wide-eyed, clutching a bundle of fresh herbs. The girl's youthful hope was a fragile thing in a village drowning in despair. That evening, Elara found herself drawn to the edge of the village where the blight's corruption crept closest. The cold wind tugged at her cloak, carrying with it a faint whisper that seemed to weave through the rustling leaves and broken branches. She strained to listen, her heart pounding in her chest. The voices were faint, like distant echoes in a cavern, but unmistakable. The Blight was speaking, not in words she could understand, but in sounds that resonated deep within her. A chill ran through her, part fear, part awe, and beneath it all, a flicker of hope. "What do you want?" she whispered to the dark rot that pulsed and shimmered before her. No answer came, only the soft rustle of leaves and the endless creeping of decay. Elara knew then that her life would never be the same. The Blight was no mere disease, it was something more, something alive. And if she could understand it, perhaps she could save what remained of her people. But the path ahead was shadowed with uncertainty, and the cost of knowledge was not yet clear. Her resolve hardened. Tomorrow she would begin her search for answers beyond the village borders, into the broken heart of the Empire itself. For the Blight was spreading, and with it the fate of Virelia hung in the balance. As darkness settled over the land, the whispered voices of the Blight carried on the wind, weaving promises and warnings alike. And Elara, healer and seeker, stepped into the unknown, driven by a desperate hope to turn back the rot before it consumed them all. The rot begins, but so does the fight for survival.
Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The sun had barely risen over the jagged horizon of Virelia when Elara stepped out into the chill morning air, her breath misting in front of her like fragile smoke. The village was quiet, save for the low groans of the wind and the distant crackling of dying leaves. Each step she took was careful, measured. The earth beneath her feet was a patchwork of cracked soil and creeping rot, the Blight. It was alive, she was certain now, and it was watching. She knelt by a cluster of blighted plants, their once vibrant leaves now mottled and curling, the veins darkened with the same unnatural shadow that had claimed so much of their land. Her fingers hovered just above the infected growth. A faint hiss stirred the air, soft and barely perceptible, like a whisper lost among the rustling branches. Elara's heart quickened. She whispered, "Can you hear me?" into the cold morning silence. The reply was a breath, a susurrus weaving through the leaves and soil, a chorus of faint voices that seemed to ripple in the very air around her. It was not the wind nor the trees, it was something else, something alive. Her skin prickled with a mixture of fear and awe, the realization dawning that the Blight was not a mere disease, but a presence, a consciousness reaching out from the depths of corruption. Back inside her hut, the flickering candlelight cast long shadows against the worn wooden walls. Elara sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she spoke softly into the darkness. "What do you want? How can I help?" The Blight answered in whispers, a tangled language of sound and silence, of breath and shadow. She strained to catch meaning in the murmurs, sensing a desire for communication, a yearning to be understood. Mira, her young apprentice, watched from the doorway with wide-open eyes. "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. Elara met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I don't know yet, but if it can speak, then perhaps it is more than just a curse. Perhaps it holds the key to saving us all." The weight of those words settled heavily between them. Outside, the village stirred with unease. Mothers clutched their children tightly, faces etched with worry as the blight crept closer with each passing day. The air was thick with desperation, and whispers of fear spread faster than the rot itself. Elara found herself standing before them in the square, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "I will find a way to stop this, I promise you. I will uncover the truth behind the blight, no matter the cost." Some villagers nodded, their hope fragile but real. Others looked away, distrust shadowing their eyes. The blight had already claimed too much, and trust was a rare currency in these times. That night, as the village settled beneath a blanket of stars, Elara sat beside the hearth with Mira. The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the lines of worry and determination. "Do you think it can be reasoned with?" Mira asked softly. Elara's gaze drifted to the window, where the dark earth pulsed faintly beneath the moonlight, as if breathing. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to try, because if we don't listen, if we don't understand what this blight wants, then we are lost." The whispers from the rot seeped into her dreams that night, voices weaving a haunting lullaby of decay and survival, urging her onward into the dark heart of the plague. Days passed, and Elara's conversations with the blight grew more frequent and urgent. She learned to discern patterns in the whispers, pauses that felt like breaths, tones that hinted at emotions, and words that surfaced like fragments of forgotten memories. The blight was not merely a force of destruction, but a being shaped by centuries of pain and transformation, seeking connection in a world that had rejected it. Yet, with each revelation, Elara felt the weight of isolation grow heavier. Her companions shared her fears, but not her hope. Old Joran, the village elder, warned her in hushed tones, "The blight is a darkness older than our empire. To listen too closely is to invite despair." But Elara's resolve did not waver. She knew that understanding was their only chance. As the whispers grew louder in her mind, she promised herself silently, "I will find the truth, and I will make it speak." The chapter closes with Elara standing at the edge of the blighted forest, shadows swirling beneath the twisted branches. The whispers beckon her deeper, a siren call to a truth that could save or doom them all. Her breath catches in her throat as she steps forward into the darkness, where the blight waits to reveal its secrets.
Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. Elara sat by the flickering hearth, the dying embers casting long shadows across the worn wooden walls of her small cottage. Her hands trembled slightly as they traced the faded stitches on a patchwork cloth, her mother's handiwork, a relic from a time before the blight had crept into their lives like a dark stain. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint crackling of the fire and the distant hollow groans of the village struggling against decay. Memory surged unbidden, raw and relentless, her mother's gentle voice teaching her the secrets of herbs and poultices, the warmth of home before everything began to unravel. Outside, the village lay shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog that the elders whispered was the breath of the blight itself. Elara's heart ached, for the faces now lost to the rot, friends and kin who had slipped away in agonizing silence, their bodies twisted by the creeping curse. She had poured every ounce of knowledge and hope into healing them, but the blight was merciless, its dark tendrils reaching deeper with each passing day. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door.
Rising, she opened it to find Kalen standing in the dim light of dusk, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying day. The scar over his left eye, a jagged reminder of battles past, gave him a fierce, unreadable expression. He said nothing at first, simply nodding in greeting, his presence steady and unyielding. "I heard you planned to leave," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that nonetheless carried the weight of concern. Elara nodded, her gaze drifting back to the hearth. "I have to. Staying here will only mean watching more of us fall. There's knowledge beyond these hills, secrets that might save us." Kalen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. "The world beyond has grown darker than these hills, healer. The Blight isn't the only danger." "I know, but doing nothing is no longer an option. I must try." The two shared a long silence, the gravity of the decision settling between them like a tangible force. Finally, Kalen stepped forward, extending a rough, calloused hand. "Then I'll go with you. I can't stand by and watch you walk into the darkness alone." Elara hesitated, then grasped his hand firmly. In that moment, a fragile alliance was forged, one born of necessity, tempered by mutual respect and an unspoken understanding of the peril ahead. The morning of their departure was cloaked in a pale, cold light. Villagers gathered in the square, their faces etched with fear and sorrow as Elara addressed them. Her voice wavered, but held firm beneath the weight of their gazes. Mira, her young apprentice, stood close, eyes wide and bright, despite the shadow of uncertainty. As the village gates creaked open, Elara and Kalen stepped beyond the protective walls, the scent of damp earth and decay thick in the cool morning air. The land stretched before them, scarred and silent, whispering of forgotten glories and the relentless advance of the Blight. Each step was heavy with the weight of what was left behind and the unknown that lay ahead. Elara's thoughts churned, a tempest of fear, doubt, and a fierce determination that blazed brighter than the dying light around them. She spoke softly, words meant as much for herself as for the silent companion at her side. "Whatever awaits us, we face it together." Kalen's grip tightened on the leather strap of his sword. Together. And so, beneath a waning moon, their journey began. A fragile hope against the consuming darkness of the Blight.
Chapter 4. The Scholar's Secret. The forest stretched before them like a living shadow, dense and whispering secrets Elara could almost hear if she listened closely enough. The air was thick with moisture, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint aroma of moss and forgotten magic. Elara tightened the straps on her satchel, the weight of their purpose grounding her despite the chill that danced along her spine. Beside her, Kalen moved with the practiced silence of a warrior accustomed to unseen dangers, his broad shoulders casting long, steady shadows beneath the skeletal trees. "Are you sure this is the place?" Kalen's voice was low, edged with caution. Elara nodded, her sharp green eyes scanning the underbrush for the telltale signs Lyria had described. The map was clear. She's here, somewhere close. After several minutes of careful navigation, they reached a clearing where a small hut crouched beneath a canopy of twisted branches. Smoke rose in thin, curling tendrils from a stone chimney, and the faint glow of candlelight flickered through the grime-streaked windows. It was a place removed from the world, a sanctuary for secrets best left undiscovered. Kaelin's hand hovered near the hilt of his sword as Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding with the weight of what they sought. She raised a fist and knocked gently. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a slender figure with pale skin and short silver hair that shimmered like moonlight. Her piercing blue eyes regarded them with a mixture of suspicion and weary calculation. "You must be Elara," the woman said, her voice smooth but guarded. "And this must be Kaelin. I've heard whispers of your journey." Elara swallowed hard but met the scholar's gaze steadily. "We need your knowledge, Lyria. The Blight, it's not just a disease. We believe it's something more, something born of magic." Lyria's eyes narrowed, and she stepped aside, motioning them in. "Then you have come to the right place. Though I warn you, the knowledge I hold is dangerous. It has already cost me my place among the scholars." Inside the hut was a testament to a mind consumed by forbidden inquiry. Shelves groaned under the weight of ancient tomes, their cracked leather bindings etched with arcane symbols. Scrolls lay unfurled on a cluttered desk, their faded inks shimmering faintly in the flickering candlelight. The scent of burning herbs and old parchment filled the cramped space. Elara approached a shelf and pulled down a brittle scroll, unrolling it carefully on the worn table. The faded script glowed faintly with a residual magic that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. "The Blight," Lyria began, tracing a finger over the ancient text, "was not an accident of nature. It was born centuries ago, the product of forbidden experiments meant to unlock eternal life. The Empire's greatest mages sought to conquer death itself, but instead they unleashed a force beyond their control, a sentient, evolving plague that consumes and transforms all that touches." Elara's breath caught as the weight of the revelation settled over her. The Blight was not merely a sickness, but a consequence of the Empire's hubris, an echo of their reckless desire for power. Kaelin exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "So this thing is a punishment?" Lyria shook her head slowly. "Not punishment, but a consequence. The Blight is curious, even intelligent. It seeks communication, understanding. Yet it is also destructive, a force of nature reclaiming what was taken." The room felt charged with a heavy sorrow, shadows flickering as if alive, responding to the unspoken truths. Elara's fingers brushed the edge of the scroll, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. "How do we stop it?" asked Elara, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyria's gaze darkened. "That is the question, isn't it? To fight it blindly is to doom ourselves, but to listen too closely may mean losing who we are. The knowledge you seek comes with a price." Kaelin stepped toward the door, restless and wary. "We can't be paralyzed by fear. We need a plan, or we risk losing everything." Elara remained seated, staring at the glowing text. Her heart ached with the burden of choice. The Blight was no longer a simple enemy. It was a riddle wrapped in decay, a mirror reflecting the Empire's darkest desires. As the night deepened outside, Elara slipped quietly from the hut, seeking solace beneath the bruised twilight sky. The forest around her seemed to breathe with life and rot intertwined, the faint rustle of corrupted leaves whispering secrets she was only beginning to understand.
She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, tentative words reaching out to the blight itself. For a moment, the air stilled. Then a faint, almost imperceptible response stirred the shadows. A whisper carried on the wind. Elara's resolve hardened. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she would walk it, no matter the cost. The secrets of the Blight were hers to uncover, and with them, perhaps, the fate of Varelia. But as the stars blinked cold above, a question lingered like a shadow in her mind. How far could she go before the knowledge consumed her too? And so the night held its breath, waiting for the next step in a dance of decay and hope.
Chapter 5. Tensions Rising. The sun hung low over the fractured horizon, its fading light casting long shadows over the broken remnants of what had once been a bustling trade village. The air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of smoldering wood, remnants of recent fires that scarred the landscape like open wounds. Elara's group approached cautiously, their footsteps crunching over rubble and brittle leaves that whispered of decay. Kalen moved at the front, his broad shoulders squared, eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of danger. The scar over his left eye twitched slightly as he caught the wary gazes of figures emerging from the shadows. Survivors, armed, hardened, and suspicious of any outsiders. Their weapons, cobbled from rusted blades and scavenged crossbows, gleamed dully in the dying light. Elara's heart tightened. The Blight had already stolen so much: homes, loved ones, hope. And yet here were more survivors, not united but fractured, their fear breeding suspicion of any outsiders. The fragile threads holding their world together threatened to snap. "Halt!" a grizzled man barked, stepping forward. His lined face was etched with hardship, eyes sharp as flint. "State your purpose. No strangers pass through without proof." Elara stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We seek only aid and knowledge. The Blight spreads faster than any of us can bear. We mean no harm." Kalen's hand hovered near the hilt of his sword, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. "We're not here to fight," Elara said softly, her voice steady despite the knot of tension in her stomach. "We believe there's a way to stop this, to save what remains." Murmurs rippled through the survivor group. Doubt and hope warred in their eyes. Suddenly, a sharp clang rang out. A stone thrown, a warning shot, igniting the tinderbox of fear. Kalen stepped forward, voice low and commanding. "Stand down, we want peace." But the fragile balance shattered. Shouts erupted, weapons brandished, and Elara found herself caught between the rising storm of hostility and her desperate plea for unity. In the chaos, Lyria's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of something near the village's shattered temple, a charred fragment of parchment half buried in ash. She moved swiftly, brushing away soot to reveal faded, cryptic symbols glowing faintly under the twilight. The ancient script spoke of the Blight's origin, entwined with forbidden magic and hubris long buried beneath the Empire's ruins. "This," Lyria whispered, voice trembling with a mix of reverence and dread, "might hold the key, but it's dangerous knowledge." Elara nodded, the weight of their mission pressing heavier on her shoulders. "We must be cautious," she said, "but we cannot turn back now." As the night cloaked the land in shadows, the group gathered beneath the skeletal branches of dying trees. The fire crackled weakly, its light flickering against faces drawn and weary. Whispers floated on the cool air, debates over trust, survival, and the uncertain path ahead.
Kaelin's gaze met Elara's, a silent exchange of resolve and warning. The Blight was more than a plague. It was a force unraveling not just flesh and bone, but the fragile bonds between people. Elara closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer, not just for healing, but for the strength to hold together, the fragile hope flickering amidst the growing darkness. Whatever lay ahead, she knew the road would be darker still, and the choices more harrowing. Yet within her stirred a fierce determination to confront the rot within and without, to seek a future where survival meant more than mere existence. The Empire might be falling, but Elara would not let it fall without a fight. And as the night deepened, the whispers of the Blight seemed to echo through the trees, an eerie, haunting lullaby that promised both peril and revelation. The journey was far from over, and the fractures within humanity threatened to widen into chasms impossible to cross. But Elara's resolve burned brighter than ever, a fragile flame against the encroaching blight of despair. Tomorrow, she promised herself, we face whatever comes next, together. The fire flickered once more, then steadied, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts upon the dying earth. The Blight was watching, listening, and waiting. And so was Elara. The fight for Virelia's soul had only just begun.
Chapter 6. A Voice in the Rot. The air inside the ruined temple was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. But to Elara, it was a sanctuary, a fragile refuge from the relentless rot that gnawed at the world outside. She knelt on the cracked stone floor, fingertips trembling as they brushed against the dark, shifting mass of the Blight that had crept into the chamber like a living shadow. The Blight pulsed faintly, a soft, eerie glow emanating from its core, casting flickering lights against the crumbling walls. "Speak," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint crackling of corrosion eating away at the ancient stone. The Blight answered not with words, but with a chorus of whispers, soft, sibilant, and strangely melodic, filling her mind with fragmented images and emotions. At first, the voices were chaotic, like a storm of unintelligible murmurs, but gradually patterns emerged. It was not a mindless disease as she had feared. It was alive, aware, and most astonishingly, it wanted to communicate. A shiver ran down her spine. "You want to speak?" she asked, her voice trembling. The whispers coalesced into a singular thought, a sensation more than a word. Curiosity. The Blight was reaching out, seeking understanding. It did not desire to destroy blindly. It sought dialogue, connection. Elara's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. Could this be the key to saving her people, to halting the relentless spread of the rot? But such a revelation was without peril. Outside, Kaelin stood sentinel, his silhouette rigid beneath the starless sky. His eyes, sharp and wary, flicked toward the temple entrance. Every instinct screamed at him to distrust the Blight, to see it as a ravenous predator, not a potential ally. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, knuckles whitening. "I don't trust it," he muttered to himself, his voice rough as gravel. "It's a poison, a curse, nothing more." Inside Elara's mind was a tempest of conflicting emotions. The Blight's presence was seductive, its whispers weaving promises of knowledge and survival. But beneath the surface, she sensed something ancient and unknowable, a force that transcended human understanding. She spoke aloud, as she often did when wrestling with her thoughts. "What do you want from us? Why reach out now after centuries of silence?" The Blight responded with a flood of images,
a forgotten past where magic was wielded with arrogance, forbidden experiments seeking eternal life, and the birth of the rot as a consequence, a creation that had outgrown its maker's intentions. It was a force born of hubris, now seeking to reclaim the world in its own image. The realization settled heavily on Elara's shoulders. This was no mere plague, but a living memory of the Empire's sins, a reckoning sentient and relentless. Later that evening, Lyria joined Elara and Kaelin by the campfire. The scholar's pale face was illuminated by the flickering flames as she spread out ancient texts and arcane diagrams. The Blight's signatures matched those recorded in forbidden scrolls. It was born of dark magic, twisted experiments that sought immortality. The text warned of a consciousness that could not be destroyed, only negotiated with, if one dared. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. Negotiated? With a poison? Elara met his gaze, a fragile hope glowing in her green eyes. It's more than that now. It wants to speak, to be understood. A heavy silence fell between them, the fire crackling as shadows danced across their faces. The weight of forbidden knowledge pressed down, threatening to crush their resolve. If we listen, Lyria said cautiously, we risk losing ourselves to its influence. But if we ignore it, the rot will consume everything. Kaelin exhaled sharply, frustration and fear warring within him. I'll protect you, Elara, but be careful. The Blight is not just a disease. It's a force that corrupts the soul. Elara nodded, the burden of her choice clear. To understand the Blight was to risk everything. The survival of her people, her own sanity, and the fragile hope that still flickered amidst the decay. As night deepened, Elara returned to the temple, her voice a whisper in the darkness. I'm listening, she said softly. Tell me your story. And the Blight answered, its voice a haunting melody that promised both salvation and destruction. The chapter closes on Elara's silhouette against the glowing rot, a fragile bridge between two worlds as the whispers of the Blight swirl around her, leaving the reader suspended between dread and hope.
Chapter 7: Betrayal's Sting. The campfire cast long, trembling shadows across the worn faces of the group, the night air thick with a tension that had been steadily mounting for days. Elara sat near the flames, her sharp green eyes scanning the darkened tree line as the wind carried faint whispers, echoes of the Blight's ever-present murmur. She had felt the shift in the group's dynamics, the subtle glances that lingered a moment too long, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when she approached. Unease had settled like a weight upon her chest, but she had hoped it was merely the stress of their journey pressing down on everyone. Yet, nothing prepared her for the sting of betrayal that night. It began with a subtle absence. Captain Orin, the mercenary leader who had reluctantly allied with them, was nowhere to be found when the group assembled for their evening meal. Kaelin's brow furrowed in concern, his hand resting instinctively on the hilt of his sword. "He's not with the men," Kaelin remarked, his voice low and wary. "Last I saw, he was headed toward the East Ridge." Elara's heart quickened. "Without telling us?" Lyria, ever the scholar, adjusted her silver hair as she replied, "There's been a shift. I've noticed Orin lingering near the edges of camp, speaking in hushed tones. I fear he might be seeking something
beyond mere survival. Mira looked up at Elara, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and trust. "Do you think he could be working with the Blight?" Elara shook her head firmly. "No, the Blight doesn't need human pawns, at least not like this. But we must find Orin, now." They moved swiftly through the night, the flickering light of torches casting eerie glows against the gnarled trees. The Blight's pervasive rot crept closer with each step, its whispering voices threading through the silence. As they crested the ridge, the flicker of another fire came into view, distant but unmistakably human. Elara's breath caught. From the shadows near the fire, Captain Orin emerged, his face grim, eyes darting nervously. Around him, figures cloaked in tattered robes leaned in, their faces obscured, but their intent clear. "Orin!" Elara called out, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "What is the meaning of this?" He turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before a cold resolve settled in his gaze. "You don't understand, Elara. This plague, this blight, it's not just a curse. It's power. Power we can wield." Kalen stepped forward, his broad frame cutting a protective silhouette between Elara and the mercenaries. "You're risking us all for your greed?" Orin's laugh was bitter. "Greed? No. Survival. The Empire is dead. The Blight is the future. Those who control it will rule what remains." Elara's heart pounded. "You don't see what it truly is. The Blight corrupts everything it touches. It doesn't care for power. It consumes. And what choice do we have? Die slowly in the ruins or seize control? I choose control." The standoff shattered when one of Orin's followers lunged toward Kalen with a dagger. Steel clashed, the sharp ring of metal echoing through the trees. Mira screamed, ducking behind a fallen log, while Lyria's voice rose in frantic incantations, seeking to hold back the chaos with fragile spells. Elara's hands trembled as she reached for her healing herbs, her mind racing. This betrayal cut deeper than any wound. The fracture in their fragile alliance threatened to unravel everything they had fought for. As the battle raged, she locked eyes with Orin, seeing not just a traitor, but a man consumed by desperation and fear. When the dust settled, Orin and his followers fled into the night, leaving behind a camp shaken but unbroken. Elara knelt beside Kalen, who bore a shallow gash across his forearm, and then turned to Mira, whose wide eyes reflected both shock and newfound resolve. Lyria approached, clutching a tattered tome. "This is what I feared. The Blight's influence grows stronger, not just in the land, but in the hearts of those who seek to command it." Elara nodded, the weight of her responsibility pressing down harder than ever. "We must be vigilant. Trust is fragile, and the Blight's corruption is a poison not just of flesh, but of spirit." That night, as the camp settled into an uneasy silence, Elara stood apart, staring up at the vast, indifferent sky. The stars seemed distant, cold witnesses to the fragile flicker of hope she clung to. The betrayal had ignited a fire within her, a determination to face the darkness, not just in the world, but in the hearts of those she loved. "We will endure," she whispered to the night, "even if the Blight tries to tear us apart." And with that vow, the journey ahead grew darker, but Elara's resolve burned brighter than ever.